90 million people visit this country every year. Almost all of them see the same 3 cities. And almost none of them see the border it's built on. Not a line on a map. A real border you can stand on, made of wind, salt water, and 9 miles of open sea. This is Spain, where Europe ends and Africa begins. On the beach at Tarifa, the 2 continents sit close enough that you can see the mountains of Morocco without squinting. For 700 years, they shared this land. And everything worth seeing here grew out of that meeting. It left its fingerprints everywhere. A palace where water runs through the walls. A cathedral with a forest of striped arches, built first as a mosque. Whole villages painted white against the heat. And a bridge thrown across a gorge that shouldn't hold a town at all. So this journey works differently. We start on the narrow strip of sea where it all began. Then let one place lead to the next. South to north, mainland to islands. Keep that border in mind as you watch. Because once you see it, you'll see it everywhere. And the final stretch of this trip leaves Europe behind completely, without ever leaving Spain. The beach where our journey starts belongs to a small white town that lives on wind. This is Tarifa, the southernmost point of mainland Europe, where gusts funnel through the strait almost without rest. Hundreds of kite surfers ride them, their sails scattered over the waves like confetti. Behind the sand, the old town hides in narrow lanes, its walls first raised to watch the crossing. And just offshore, a stone causeway walks straight out into the water, to the exact line where 2 seas divide. At the end of that causeway, the Mediterranean laps one side and the Atlantic pounds the other. Ahead lies the strait itself, 14 kilometers of open water and one of the busiest shipping lanes on Earth. Cargo ships thread the gap in both directions all day long. Behind them, the mountains of Morocco stand sharp against the sky. 2 continents, close enough to share weather. Look east along the Spanish shore, and one grey mountain interrupts it, flying a flag that isn't Spanish. That mountain is the Rock of Gibraltar, British for the last 300 years. It's a slab of limestone over 400 meters tall, with a whole city pressed along its base. On the ridgeline live the only wild monkeys in Europe. A few hundred Barbary macaques with a taste for tourists' snacks. Local legend says that if the monkeys ever leave, the British will follow. So far, both are staying put. West of the rock, the Spanish coast runs wild again, and the sand starts to pile into hills. The biggest of those hills is at Bologna, where a dune of white sand climbs 30 meters out of the sea and spills into the pines. It creeps a little further inland every year, pushed by the same wind that powers the kites. At its foot stand the columns of Bailo Claudia, a Roman town that once fed the empire with salted fish. Those stones have faced Africa for 2,000 years. The people who came after the Romans looked at these bare hills differently. They climbed them, and they painted everything they built the color of bone. Scattered through the mountains behind the coast are dozens of villages so white they look bleached. The lime wash has a job to do. It throws back the sun through summers that top 40 degrees. A trick the Moors taught this land 700 years ago. In many villages, the whitewash is renewed by hand every spring, and in some, it's the law. Each village has its own character. One of them guards a lake, the color of a swimming pool. That one is Zahara de la Sierra. Stacked on a crag between a Moorish watchtower and a turquoise reservoir. From the tower, lookouts once scanned these hills for raiders. Because for 2 centuries, this was the true border between Christian and Moorish Spain. The villages still carry it in their names, de la Frontera, of the frontier. And the grandest frontier village of all wears its cliff like a crown. Arcos de la Frontera balances on a ridge so narrow that its houses line up single file along the drop. The view from the edge falls straight down to green farmland, with nothing between your balcony and the fields but air. At the top, the castle and the church share the last few meters of solid ground. Some streets are steep enough to be stairways. Closer to the sea, one village traded its fortress days for flowers. Frigiliana might be the prettiest of them all, a maze of cobbled lanes, blue doors, and pots of geraniums halfway up a mountain above the Mediterranean. The last Moorish rebellion in these mountains ended on its slopes, and the village has kept its Moorish street plan ever since. Wander uphill and the crowds thin out until it's just you and the whitewash. One more village looks down on the coast from even higher, and it runs on donkeys. Mijas hangs 600 meters above the Costa del Sol. Close enough to see the beaches, far enough to ignore them. Its donkey taxis started in the 1960s, when tourists kept stopping farmers on their way home to ask for rides. Today, the decorated burrows are the village's calling card, clopping past white walls and geraniums. But the real drama of these mountains hides an hour to the north, where the ground itself splits open beneath a town. Ronda is the white town that outgrew its hill. It sits on a plateau, sliced clean through by the El Tajo Gorge. A crack in the earth more than 100 meters deep, with houses walking right up to the lip. People have lived on this rock since before Rome. Seen from the valley floor, the town seems to float. And its two halves are stitched together by one of the boldest bridges ever built. The Puente Nuevo took 42 years to raise, and dozens of workers died building it. Its arches climb the full height of the gorge, stone on stone, from the river to the streets. Finished in 1793, it turned a geological accident into the most famous site in the Andalusian mountains. A chamber sits above the central arch, and over the years it has served as a prison. Just across the bridge waits a circle of sand, where modern Spain wrote itself a legend. Ronda's Plaza de Toros is one of the oldest bull rings in the country, and many call it the most beautiful. 2 tiers of stone columns circle the arena like a cloister. Here, in the 1700s, the Romero family set down the rules of the modern corrida. The arena hosts only one fight a year now. The rest of the time, it stands empty, and you can walk the raked sand alone. South of the bridge, the old Moorish quarter drapes over the hilltop in a tangle of cobbles and iron balconies. Small palaces hide behind plain white walls, a habit this town never dropped. Follow the lanes downhill, and the streets narrow. The crowds disappear, and Ronda feels 7 centuries younger. An hour east, another town faced the same rocky landscape and made a stranger choice. Instead of building on the rock, it moved in underneath. Setenil de las Bodegas made its home inside its hill. A river carved deep overhangs into the soft rock here. And centuries ago, people simply walled off the openings and moved in. The result is a town where whole streets run beneath a ceiling of stone, with houses that barely need roofs. The heat of high summer stops at the door. Invading armies had a harder time of it, which is exactly what the builders intended. Cale Cuevas del Sol is the picture everyone comes for. A row of white houses tucked under one gigantic ledge. The rock bulging out over the doorways like a frozen wave. This side faces the sun, so the street below stays bright all afternoon. One block over, Cuevas de la Sombra lives in permanent shade. 2 streets, 2 climates, 1 boulder. Life here happens under the stone. Bars and small restaurants line the cave streets, their tables pressed against the rock wall, serving ham and honey from the surrounding hills. The town's name remembers its old wine cellars, the Bodegas, which stayed cool inside the mountain long before refrigerators existed. And when the road finally drops out of these hills, it unwinds south toward a coast with 300 days of sun a year, and a city that gave the world its most famous painter. That painter was Pablo Picasso, and the city is Málaga, the bright, loud capital of the Costa del Sol. A Moorish fortress called the Alcazaba still climbs the hill above the harbor in layers of stone walls and orange trees, with the Gibralfaro castle standing guard higher up. Ferries and cruise ships dock a short walk from the tapas bars. Beaches run through the middle of the city itself. And east along the shore, the coast saves one of its best views for a single railing. In Nerja, the whole Mediterranean opens up beneath your feet. Locals call it the Balcony of Europe, a palm-lined terrace on a cliff that juts out over the sea, with fishing coves tucked into the rocks on either side. A Spanish king gave the spot its name about a century and a half ago, and it has kept the crowds ever since. The water below runs clear enough to watch the fish. Follow the shore back the other way, and the beach towels slowly turn into super yachts. Marbella is where the Costa del Sol dresses up. White villas spread beneath the grey wall of the Sierra Blanca. And in the marina at Puerto Banús, yachts the size of ferries idle beside sports cars. At sunrise, the beach clubs glow gold, and the sea looks like poured metal. It's a long way from the fishing nets this coast started with. The mountains behind it hold a grander kind of wealth. Up there, past the haze, waits the Red Palace from the start of our journey. The Red Palace is the Alhambra, and it fills a whole hilltop above the city of Granada. Its name means exactly what it looks like, the red one. Behind its plain walls hide courtyards of carved plaster, so fine it reads like lace. Reflecting pools that double every arch, and one phrase from the Quran repeated thousands of times. This was the last Moorish kingdom in Spain, and it held out here for 2.5 centuries after the rest had fallen. Snow often caps the mountains, rising straight behind its towers. The builders were dreaming of heaven, and they wrote it in water. Next door, on its own terrace, sits the Generalife, the Sultan's summer garden. Water is the whole show. It slides through channels cut 700 years ago, leaps in thin jets over the walkways, and has never once stopped flowing, fed by mountain snow through pipes buried in the hillside. This is the palace where water runs through the walls. From the garden's edge, the view crosses a valley to a white hillside that looks like Morocco moved north. That hillside is the Albaicín, Granada's old Moorish quarter. A maze of whitewashed lanes facing the Alhambra across the valley. Every evening, the little square of San Nicolás fills with people waiting for the palace walls to turn gold. Higher up in Sacromonte, families dug their homes straight into the slope. And those cave houses became the cradle of flamenco. Dancers still perform it across the city, all stamp and swirl and thunder. Granada was the last Moorish capital to fall. To meet the first great one, follow the olive groves west, to a building that confused everyone who ever tried to name it. They call it the Mezquita, the mosque, even though it has been a cathedral for nearly 800 years. Step inside, and the confusion makes sense. More than 850 columns fan out in every direction, joined by double arches striped red and white, a stone forest with no visible end. This was the greatest mosque in the Western world, back when Córdoba was Europe's largest city. A place of libraries and street lamps, while most of the continent lived in mud. Then the conquerors built a full Gothic church, right through its middle. The result shouldn't work. Somehow it does. Outside, old Córdoba plays the same trick on a smaller scale. Plain doorways along the lanes open into private courtyards, drowning in flowers. Cool wells of shade that the Romans designed and the Moors perfected. Every May, the city holds a contest, and families throw their patios open to anyone who cares to look. The prize is mostly pride. The flowers alone are worth the trip. Down at the river, the city's oldest landmark still does its job. The Roman bridge has crossed the Guadalquivir on 16 stone arches for 2,000 years, with a watchtower guarding the far bank. Cross it late in the day, when the Mezquita glows behind you and the water turns to bronze. This same river built one more city on its way to the sea. For one golden century, that city was the richest place on earth. Seville won the monopoly on the New World. For 100 years, every ship returning from the Americas had to unload its cargo here. And the gold went straight into stone. Orange trees line the streets. The Guadalquivir slides past the quays that once handled the wealth of half a planet. And the proof of those years still fills the center of town, starting with a palace that kings never stopped using. The Real Alcázar is the oldest royal palace in Europe, still hosting royalty. Its finest rooms were built for a Christian king by Moorish craftsmen. Horseshoe arches, carved plaster, courtyards with a ribbon of water down the middle. The style has its own name, mudéjar, and nowhere is it finer than here. Gardens of palms and fountains spread behind the walls, so otherworldly that film crews borrow them constantly. Next door rises the largest Gothic cathedral on Earth. Its builders wanted something so big that anyone who saw it would call them mad, and they kept their word. The bell tower, the Giralda, began life as the mosque's minaret. And it has ramps instead of stairs, so the muezzin could ride a horse to the top. One building, 3 empires deep. Ten minutes south, Seville built a half-moon plaza for a World's Fair a century ago, and it outshone the fair. A canal follows the curve of the palace, crossed by footbridges dressed in painted tiles, and alcoves along the wall map every Spanish province in ceramic. Rowing boats drift beneath the bridges all afternoon. Half an hour east, the town of Carmona has watched the plain from its hill since before Rome. Behind a gate, the legions themselves march through. Its Roman graveyard is carved straight down into the rock. Seville's gold eventually thinned. But the men who went out to fetch it came, mostly, from a harder country farther west, one that travelers still skip. Extremadura means something close to the far hard land, and Spain's empty west still earns the name. Holm oaks dot plains that run unbroken to the horizon, and white storks pile their huge nests on posts and rooftops all across them. In the middle stands Cáceres, a walled old town so complete that filmmakers use it as a ready-made Middle Ages. Stone palaces, crooked towers, and not a shopfront in sight inside the walls. The families who raised those towers made their money in a brutal business. This region bred the conquistadors. Long before them, Rome made a capital here. Merida keeps the finest Roman ruins in Spain, and its theatre refuses to behave like one. Built 2,000 years ago for 6,000 spectators, it still has its stage wall of columns and statues. And every summer, actors still perform beneath them. The Gladiators Amphitheatre waits right next door. Walking between the two feels like commuting through the 1st century. And Trujillo gave the world Francisco Pizarro, the soldier who toppled the Inca Empire. His statue rides a bronze horse in the middle of a granite square, paid for with Peruvian silver. Ringed by the palaces his family built when the treasure came home. A castle older than all of it crowns the hill. The money that passed through towns like this eventually pooled in one place. Spain needed a capital, and a king simply pointed at the map. He pointed at Madrid, a modest market town in the dead center of the country, and made it the capital of the world's biggest empire. It sits at 650 meters, the highest capital in Europe. With cold winters, baking summers, and an energy that never quite switches off. Life here happens outdoors, on terraces and plazas. The grandest of them, the Plaza Mayor, has hosted markets, coronations, and executions across 4 centuries. These days, it settles for coffee and street artists. The empire's leftovers wait a short walk away. The royal palace counts 3,418 rooms, the largest functioning royal palace in Europe. The royal family chooses not to live there. They keep it for ceremonies and let visitors wander the state rooms instead. The paintings the empire collected hang nearby in the Prado, Velázquez and Goya among them. 5 centuries of power along one boulevard. An hour south, the village of Chinchon keeps one of the country's oddest main squares. It's a rough circle of 3-story houses laced with wooden balconies. And for centuries, those balconies have been rented out as theater seats whenever the square turns into a stage or a bullring. The rest of the year, it's cafe tables and anise, the local liqueur. From here, the road runs north and barely stops climbing until it smells the Atlantic. The next coast is green, cool, and quietly convinced it cooks better than anywhere else in Spain. The boast belongs to San Sebastián, and the numbers back it up. This modest seaside city holds more Michelin stars per person than almost anywhere on the planet. But the real eating happens standing up. In the old town, every bar counter disappears under trays of pintaxos. Little towers of food pinned together with toothpicks. And the crowd drifts happily from bar to bar, eating one small masterpiece at a time. The Basques treat cooking as a competitive sport. Their city looks the part too, and its beach might be the most elegant in Europe. La Concha curves for more than a kilometer around a bay shaped like a scallop shell, with a green island parked in the middle and headlands closing both ends. A white iron railing runs the whole promenade, so recognizable it became the city's symbol. Royalty made this beach fashionable a century and a half ago, and it simply never went out of style. From the top of Monte Igueldo, the entire bay lays itself out beneath you, and the city looks drawn rather than built. Half an hour east, where Spain runs out again, the border town of Hondarribia stares across a river mouth at France. Its upper town hides behind ramparts. But the fisherman's quarter steals the show. Wooden balconies painted green, red and blue, stacked with flowers along cobbled lanes. France sits minutes away across the water. Nobody seems in any hurry to cross. And farther west, along this green coast, the hills have been busy producing shapes. A building that changes color with the weather, and a stone staircase that walks straight into the sea. Bilbao spent a century as a hard-working port of shipyards and steel, then reinvented itself in a single stroke. The city bet its future on a museum. The cranes gave way to riverside promenades, and the grey industrial river now reflects one of the most famous buildings on Earth. Planners everywhere call it the Bilbao effect and try to copy it. The building that started it all still catches the light like nothing else in the country. The Guggenheim is wrapped in 33,000 sheets of titanium. And it never looks the same twice. Silver at noon, gold at sunset, pewter in the rain. Out front sits a puppy the size of a house, grown entirely from living flowers, and a red bridge frames the whole scene. People argued for years about whether the building outshines the art inside it. The argument alone keeps the tickets selling. Beyond the city, the Basque Coast has been staging drama of its own for much longer. San Juan de Gaztelugatxe is a rock island tied to the mainland by a man-made stone bridge, with a walled path of 241 steps zigzagging up to a lonely hermitage. Sailors have climbed it for 1,000 years, and television lately made it a fantasy throne. Tradition says you ring the chapel bell 3 times at the top for luck. Far below, the Atlantic explodes white against the rocks. Follow that coastline west, and the land only grows taller, until the mountains themselves stand in the sea spray. The Picos de Europa were often the first piece of Spain that returning sailors saw. And the name stuck, the Peaks of Europe. Walls of grey limestone jump more than 2,000 meters out of green valleys, barely 20 kilometers from the coast. Glacial lakes sit in high meadows where cowbells provide the only soundtrack. And the lakes of Covadonga mirror the whole range on a still morning. Roads here surrender quickly to footpaths. The villages they reach seem to have been skipped by time entirely. Deep in the valleys sits Potes, a huddle of stone bridges and medieval towers at the meeting point of 4 rivers. The Torre del Infantado anchors the center, a defensive keep that has stood watch since the Middle Ages. Around it, stone houses lean over lanes that have carried mule trains. Pilgrims and now hikers, all bound for the high country. The sea is barely an hour downhill. And on the way to it waits a village whose own name teases it. Santillana del Mar is called the town of three lies, since it has no saint, sits on a hill, and never touches the sea. What it does have is one honey-colored medieval street after another, so intact that walking them feels like trespassing in another century. The caves of Altamira, just up the hill, made the town famous, though their painted ceiling is sealed away now for its own protection, and the cobbles carry the fame instead. West of here, the coast turns wilder. One fishing village there climbs out of its harbor like rows of seats in a theater. That village is Cudillero, and its houses scale the walls of a narrow cove in bands of pink, orange, and blue, stacked so steeply that half its streets are stairways. Fishing boats still work out of the little harbor, and the day's catch lands on tables along the quay by lunchtime. Local legend says the colors once helped sailors pick out their own houses from the sea. Asturians call this shoreline the Green Coast. It spans 200 kilometers, proving the name. Further along, Lastres pours down its own hillside toward a working port. White walls and red roofs sliding toward the water. A lighthouse holds the next headland. The beaches to either side stay quiet even in August because the water is Atlantic and honest about it. Behind the coast, hay meadows climb straight toward the Picos, and cows outnumber tourists comfortably. Nobody here appears to mind. Asturias keeps two capitals in everything but name. Oviedo, inland, is the polished one. A cathedral city of clean plazas, stone arcades, and statues on every second corner. Gijón on the water is its louder sibling, with city beaches, a real port, and an old fisherman's quarter crowding a headland. Between them, they hold the region's whole character, salt water and stone. Further west still, the green country runs on into a corner of Spain where journeys have been ending for 1,000 years. Santiago de Compostela grew up around a tomb. Medieval Europe decided the Apostle James lay buried here, and the faithful have been walking to him ever since. The city that grew to meet them is granite through and through, arcaded against the Atlantic rain that locals insist is part of the charm. At its heart stands the cathedral, a Baroque cliff of carved stone climbing above the Obradoiro Plaza. Every day, exhausted walkers drop their packs on those flagstones. Their arrival is a show that never closes. The Camino de Santiago ends in that square. After 800 kilometers for those who started at the French border. You can spot the finishers by the scallop shells tied to their packs. And by the way, they've stopped caring about the weather. Some cry, some just sit and stare up. The plaza absorbs all of it, as it has for 1,000 years. The sea that made this region rich waits barely an hour away, folded into long blue inlets. Those inlets are the Rias Baixas, drowned river valleys where the ocean reaches deep into green hills. On the shore of one sits Combaro, famous for its horios, stone grain stores raised on pillars right at the water's edge, each roof capped with a cross. They line the seafront like a fleet of little arcs, and the lanes behind them are pure, weathered granite. Fishing boats bob in rows out front. And offshore, guarding the mouth of the bay, waits the mainland's last surprise. The CS Islands close the Bay of Vigo like a gate, protected so strictly that daily visitor numbers are capped. The reward is Rodas Beach, a long curve of white sand beside a calm turquoise lagoon, backed by pine woods. A British newspaper once named it the best beach in the world. And on a clear July day, the claim feels entirely reasonable. It's a strange trick for the cold Atlantic to pull. Spain's other sea is about to answer it. Starting with a city that decided straight lines were boring. Barcelona runs on a grid until it suddenly doesn't. The city's planners drew perfect square blocks in the 1800s. And then one architect spent his life bending every line he could find. Antoni Gaudí built houses with wave-shaped walls and balconies like masks, and the city let him. Because the results kept turning out to be masterpieces. Today, his fingerprints are the city's brand. The biggest of them has been under construction for more than 140 years. The Sagrada Familia was Gaudí's obsession. A basilica designed to grow like a forest, with towers that branch and drip instead of stacking. He knew he would never see it finished, and it still isn't, though the tallest towers have finally risen. Cranes work between the spires to this day. Across town, in Park Güell, his playful side runs loose. a terrace wrapped in broken tile mosaic, columns that lean like tree trunks, and the whole city spread below, all the way down to the sea. The oldest Barcelona hides in the Gothic Quarter, a knot of medieval lanes where the sky narrows to a ribbon between the walls. Roman stones sit in the foundations, a cathedral rises from the middle of it, and small squares appear without warning. Balconies nearly touch overhead. It's the one part of the city where getting lost works in your favor. And an hour inland, the landscape performs a trick even Gaudí never managed. Montserrat means the serrated mountain, and no name was ever more honest. Fingers of grey rock rise 1,000 meters out of the plain, and a working monastery clings to a shelf halfway up, reached by cable car and rack railway. Pilgrims have climbed to its basilica for 1,000 years. Hikers keep going higher, into the stone spires, where the paths finally end. Far below, the coast road runs south, toward a city that rebuilt itself around a vanished river. Valencia turned a disaster into its best idea. After a catastrophic flood, the city moved its entire river around the outside of town. And the empty riverbed became a 9-kilometer garden running straight through the center. Locals cycled to work through what used to be water. Orange trees line the streets, and the region gave its name to the fruit. At the seaward end of that garden, the old riverbed grows buildings from the future. The City of Arts and Sciences looks like a fleet of white ships anchored in shallow pools. An eye-shaped planetarium blinks at its own reflection. An opera house wears a crest like a helmet, and white arches ripple over Europe's largest aquarium. The architect, Santiago Calatrava, grew up a few streets away. Families wander between the domes all weekend, and afterwards, many sit down to the city's other invention. Paella, still cooked over open fires the way the rice farmers started it. An hour up the coast, the Mediterranean keeps an older kind of spectacle. Peñíscola rises out of the sea on a fist of rock. A walled white town wrapped around a castle, tied to the mainland by a strip of sand. A stubborn medieval pope once ruled his corner of Christendom from here, or at least insisted that he did. Film crews borrow the ramparts constantly, and summer crowds pack the beach beneath the walls. Seen from along the shore at sunset, the whole town seems to float on the water. consider it a preview. From here, Spain steps off the mainland entirely. Ibiza has spent 50 years as the loudest island in the world, and it still throws the Mediterranean's biggest parties. Daylight tells another story. The old town, Dalt Vila, climbs inside Renaissance walls to a cathedral with the whole harbour at its feet. Around the coast, pine woods drop into coves where the water glows like glass. And the limestone islet of Es Vedrà rises offshore, wrapped in legends of sirens and sunken cities. The island next door tells the quiet version of the same story. Formentera is Ibiza's little sister, flat, slow, and reachable only by boat. At its northern tip, the beach of Ses Ilets narrows to a bar of white sand, with turquoise shallows on both sides, where anchored boats seem to hover above their own shadows. The Caribbean gets the comparisons. On a windless day, the Caribbean should worry. Back on Ibiza, the north keeps the island's old soul. Around the village of Sant Joan, whitewashed farmhouses sit among olive and carob trees, and a small white church anchors a slow main street. The travelers who arrived in the 1960s never fully left, and the villages kept their unhurried pace. It's hard to believe the clubs are 20 minutes away. Harder still to believe the next island north, where the mountains come back to meet the sea. Mallorca is the Mediterranean doing everything at once. The capital, Palma, faces the water behind a sandstone cathedral so big that sailors used it as a landmark. Beaches ring the island, and a wall of mountains guards the whole northwest coast. The Serra de Tramuntana, where the road down to Sacalobra ties itself into a famous knot of hairpins. 10 million visitors arrive every year. The mountain villages absorb them and somehow stay themselves. Sola sits in a bowl of orange groves behind the mountains, made rich by the citrus trade a century ago. A vintage wooden tram rattles from the town's square down to Port de Sola, where a horseshoe bay collects the evening light. The church on the square was shaped by a student of Gaudí. The whole valley smells faintly of oranges. Higher up the mountain road, a monastery village once hosted a very famous, very unhappy winter guest. Valdemossa stacks stone houses and green shutters around the monastery, where the composer Chopin spent one rainy winter. He was ill, the villagers were wary, and his piano arrived months late. Out of all of it came some of the loveliest music he ever wrote. The village has long since forgiven the reviews. Down the coast, its neighbor chose artists over monks. Diar drapes itself over a hill between the Tramontana and the sea. Ochre houses and cypress trees above a small shingle cove. Writers and painters have colonized it for a century. And the cemetery on its hilltop may hold the best view in the Balearics. By noon, the cove below fills with swimmers. It's a place that makes leaving feel like a mistake. The quietest of these islands waits to the east, and quiet is exactly its trick. Menorca is the Balearic that opted out. While its sisters built resorts, it stayed a biosphere reserve of farmland, dry stone walls, and long horizons. Its coast holds more beaches than Mallorca and Ibiza combined. Many reachable only on foot along the Camí de Cavals, the old bridle path that circles the entire island. The pace is set by farm gates and tides. Even the most famous beach here keeps a 5-minute walk between you and everyone else. Cala Macarella is the poster. White sand, pines to the waterline, and water in a shade of blue-green that looks color-graded even while you're standing in it. A cliff path climbs to a lookout over its twin cove, Macareleta, smaller and wilder still. Sailboats ride at anchor on their own shadows all summer. This is the Mediterranean as it looked before anyone built anything. Ciutadella, the old capital, folds honey-colored palaces and a small cathedral around a harbor as narrow as a canal, with fishing boats idling beneath the cafe tables on the quay. In the low evening light, the whole town turns gold. And with that, the Mediterranean has shown its hand. Spain keeps one last archipelago, 1,000 kilometers away in a different ocean, off the shoulder of Africa. The intro made a promise about leaving Europe without leaving Spain. Time to keep it. The Canary Islands rise from the Atlantic off the edge of the Sahara. Closer to Africa than to Europe, and Gran Canaria is their all-rounder. Locals call it a continent in miniature. The north drips green, The south bakes gold, and mountain villages sit an hour from the beach. Las Palmas, the capital, pairs a colonial old town with one of the world's great city beaches. But the island's signature waits at its southern tip, where Spain keeps an actual desert. The dunes of Maspalomas roll for kilometers between the ocean and the palm oasis behind them. Ridge after golden ridge rebuilt daily by the wind. A lighthouse from the 1800s holds the far end. Walk in far enough and the resorts disappear completely, leaving sand, sky, and your own footprints. It feels like a piece of the Sahara that caught a boat. On the next island over, the same wind went further still. Across a narrow strait, on Fuerteventura, the beaches of Coralejo run wide and white beneath a protected dune field, while kite sails carve the wind offshore and surf schools work the breaks. An islet floats in the channel, ringed by turquoise shallows. Fuerteventura is the oldest of the Canaries, worn low and smooth by 20 million years of weather. Its neighbor to the north is the opposite, young, black, and still warm. Lanzarote looks like the Earth before anyone arrived. In the 1730s, 6 years of eruptions buried a quarter of the island in lava, and the scars still red as fresh. Farmers learned to grow vines in the ash, digging thousands of crescent-shaped pits across the black fields of Lageria, each one sheltering a single green vine from the wind. The wine that results is crisp and volcanic. So is the ground it comes from, which in places has never entirely cooled. Timanfaya National Park protects the heart of the burn. A range of rust and charcoal cones known as the Fire Mountains. Whole valleys grow nothing at all. A single road loops between the craters, and every window seat feels like the moon. Because a few meters beneath the surface, the rock still holds close to 300 degrees. The island could easily have become a curiosity and nothing more. One local artist decided it deserved better. That artist was Cesar Manrique, and he bent the island's rules around beauty. He fought for low, white, billboard-free architecture, then showed everyone what he meant. A house built inside 5 lava bubbles, a lookout hidden in a cliff face, a concert hall inside a volcanic cave hung with palms. Half art, half geology, all lava. Thanks largely to him, Lanzarote still looks composed rather than developed. The last island of this journey took the opposite path. It grew a mountain so tall it owns the sky. Tenerife is built around the roof of Spain. El Teide rises 3,718 meters out of the Atlantic. A volcano so tall it makes its own weather, which means the country's highest point stands off the coast of Africa, not on the mainland at all. Clouds pile against its slopes in a white sea. Above them, observatories line the ridge, working in some of the clearest air on Earth. The Guanches, the island's first people, believed this mountain held up the sky. On the best days, the summit can see every other Canary at once. Teide National Park spreads around the peak like a borrowed planet. Fields of twisted lava, mineral streaks of red and green, and rock towers that film crews call in whenever a script says Mars. Trails climb from the crater floor toward the summit. It's among the most visited national parks on Earth, and the crowds still vanish into its scale. Yet the same island hides the volcano's complete opposite, less than an hour away. At Tenerife's northeastern tip, the Anaga Mountains answer the crater with green. Ridges covered in laurel forest older than the last ice age stand dripping in mist, while the coast below sits in sunshine. Hamlets hide in the folds, reached by roads that fray into footpaths, and black sand beaches close the valleys. It's the oldest, wettest, wildest corner of the island, and it makes a fitting final image. Our Spain began on a windy beach, staring at Africa across 9 miles of water. It ends here, on Africa's latitude, holding a piece of Europe up into the clouds. Our journey ends where it began, at the edge of the water. We followed one trail from the southern sand to the northern cliffs and out across 2 seas. And at every stop, the same story kept surfacing. 2 continents built this country together. That's the real wonder of Spain. It's the line where 2 worlds have faced each other for 1,000 years. If this journey showed you a Spain you didn't know, a like helps other travelers find it. And subscribing means you'll be aboard for the next voyage. Somewhere out there, another edge of the map is waiting. Click on the video that is appearing now to keep discovering the wonder of the world.